Hey, it's Benji Cole, son of Al Cole from CBS Radio and host of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. Run to our website, peopleofdistinction.org for more info, or you can always email me directly at benji@alcoleenterprises.com. And on the line with us today, we have Simon Rowell. We'll be discussing his fantastic book, Future Perfect, available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, pretty much any online book retailers. But if you guys want to get everything that Simon has to offer, do yourself a favor and go directly to his personal site, simonrowell.com. There, not only will you find more information on Simon himself, you'll find more information on this book, Future Perfect, as well as find hyperlinks set up to take you to the purchasing page. So one more time, that's simonrowell.com. And I will say, Simon was brought to our network, People of Distinction, today by some of the best movers in the business, Stellar Literary Press and Media Publishing. So if you have a book that you'd like moved, well, you already know you got to move it through Stellar Literary. And you can find more information on them at stellarliterary.com. And guys, listen, it is an absolute pleasure to have Simon here on the line because his book we're discussing today, Future Perfect. First and foremost, I don't know about you, but after the year that we all just had, and technically we're still going through it because we're not quite out of the pandemic yet, I could use something to just get me out of the confines that I've found myself stuck in for the past year, right? To be able to journey outside of the four walls of my home in a safe and really pleasant way. Now, the story itself, I'm going to battle a couple of different things, but you're going to get a chance to really embark upon a fantastic journey that Simon has constructed. And listen, I'm not going to go into too much detail. I'm not going to steal Simon's thunder. That is for him to go into descriptions with. But one of the underlying messages, one of the underlying themes, I think is something that is so profound. The one-liner that he gave that really encapsulates the message is that mankind has many challenges, but our biggest obstacles are ourselves. And I think that line spoke volumes. Because how often, and again, on a much smaller scale, how often do we find ourselves in predicaments where it's really our own doing? Now, maybe sometimes you don't want to hold a mirror up and come to that conclusion yourself, but I'll just speak from my own experience, and I'll be the first one to say it. Guys, there have been so many issues that I've gotten into in my life, and I think that's just part of growing, right, and maturing and learning. But so many of the obstacles that I found myself in was really my own doing. I couldn't get out of my own way, and I put myself in a position that really I didn't want to be in. Now, again, when it comes to his story, Future Perfect, we're going to be really escalating things on a much, much grander scale. But remember that underlying message. Remember that underlying theme, because that is going to be something that you'll constantly see coming up. And I'm so glad that we have Simon here on the line with us because, listen, he's the expert, okay? He's written the book. It's his ideas that he's been able to develop. So he's going to be able to articulate everything much better than I ever could. So without further ado, Simon, first and foremost, welcome to People of Distinction, and thank you very much for being a guest. How are you?
Well, very well, and thank you for that kind introduction, Benji. Yeah, absolutely happy to be here today and tell you what you want to know.
Absolutely. Well, listen, we're very much looking forward to this. I know we have so much information to cover, Simon, but let's hold off slightly before jumping into the book.
Mm-hmm.
Start by telling our listening audience a little bit more about yourself, please.
Well, I'm in my late 50s now, and so from my perspective, I have actually done quite a lot, I believe, but by the same token, I have done a lot of the same things. I've always been a software engineer, and I've lived with computers since the age of 15, which is a long time ago. You can do the math yourself. I started programming when I was 15 years old, and I went to college, I got a computer science degree, and then I lived in Germany for 15 years working for the European Space Agency, which ended up being important. And then for another 20 years, I lived in Silicon Valley, working for a lot of, well, not a lot, but several commercial software companies.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that experience really brought me to where I am today in terms of writing. And we can talk about that in a moment if you wish. But I think I've had a very consistent exposure to technology. And what it ultimately brought me to was originally to write a book about Silicon Valley and the challenges that are endemic, I would say, in the commercial software business, and why you and I are always having to do updates on our phones every 5 minutes, for example. Well, once I'd written that book, Silicon Valley Job Hunting, I then thought, okay, there's my true passion really is science fiction. When I'm watching a movie, it'll most likely be a science fiction movie. If I'm reading a book, it's going to be a science fiction book. And I think it is one of those rare areas where we have an opportunity to look at the future and sort of try to map out what we as a species are going to be doing. It's an opportunity to think about things. So that's why I arrived at where I am now.
Now, since we've already started to go there, let's continue to hold off on the narrative of the book. Let's go into a little bit more in depth with the inspiration. Not only what inspired you to write this book, Future Perfect, but as you've mentioned and you've already brought up, there's a second book in which you've written called Silicon Valley Job Hunting. Now, that was actually the first book that came out before Future Perfect, but articulate to our listening audience, Simon, what inspired you to embark upon this journey and become a creative writer?
I think, in essence, my primary driver is justice. That may sound like a bit of a broad word, but I believe that there is a lot of injustice in the way the world operates and how people treat one another. And I think, and I would argue, that in the workplace, this manifests itself a great deal. I ended up as a very senior manager in several companies at the VP level, and I would always try to do what is right for the people that reported to me. And even so, the endemic politics in corporate the software industry in particular, meant that after I stopped working a few years ago, because I really had started finding myself in repeating situations, I thought, now is the time for me to write a book about what I have experienced, first of all, what I learned from that, how anybody else can try to find a solution to a similar position that they find themselves in, and more importantly, I suppose, how corporations can change so that they make life more productive, let's say, for the people that work in these various companies. Mm-hmm. Now, we were here to talk about Future Perfect, but once that first book was written, it was quite clear to me that the discrete area of software development and the companies around the world that generate software it's just one of those areas. But a lot of the principles that came out of that first book apply to us overall. The number of people who've read that first book and have turned around to me from any other walk of life and they'll say, yes, that's exactly what happens in the finance industry, for example. So given my passion for science fiction, that is why I embarked on Future Perfect, because I realized that there were a lot of lessons that you could apply, from one's own life experience to how we are going to be as a species moving forward. So this book, Future Perfect, it's set 40 or so years in the future. I didn't want to put it too far in the future because I wanted people to be able to understand where we will be in 40 years. In the book, the world has clearly grasped a lot of the challenges that it has. I'm talking about governmental, I'm talking about environmental, economical, and societal as well. And all of these areas will be addressed in, I think, very profound ways over the coming decades. And we as a species or a civilization may not recognize the world that we have in 40 or 50 years' time. The point is that we're evolving. We only really concentrate on the technical side of things. We're all amazed by the evolution of the internet and what have you. But the real evolutions I think we're going to be making are going to be at the level of the society and how we interact with one another and how we care about one another. And in the book, just very briefly, I won't say too much, but in the book, it's quite clear that all of these efforts, however impressive they may be, are not enough, and that the fundamental characteristics of humanity are still there. That we have our prejudices and fundamental views that are very hard to wash out, and so really what is required is an external adult in the room, if you like, to come along and tell us really how things should be.
Guys, again, here on the line with Simon Rowell. We're discussing his fantastic book, Future Perfect, available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, pretty much any online retailer. But make sure you head over to his website, simonrowell.com, as well, to gather everything that Simon has to offer. Now, Simon, we've already started to go into a brief description of the book, so thank you very much for that. I'm curious about the title, Future Perfect. Now, I can assume, after hearing your background, and then also after hearing the brief description of the book, where that title comes from and really why it connects to the narrative itself. But rather than assume, since I have you here on the line, I could just ask. Simon, talk to our listening audience. Why did you choose that title to be the representation for your book?
That's a very interesting question, actually. This book is part of a series. And each book will have, it will be a future. This is actually a tense, if you realize, Future Perfect, which is why the subtitle to the book is Benjamin Privet Will Have Found His Purpose. That is Future Perfect. But obviously, with the last word, perfect, maybe a question mark should be behind it, because how do we make a perfect society? How do we improve ourselves so that we don't have the conflicts and challenges and inequities that we have in today's society? How do you create a perfect future? So that's really the stem of why it's called Future Perfect. But I would say, this book is an adventure. I feel like I'm coming across like a sociology professor, but the reality is that what I wanted to do was to write a book that was an epic adventure, something that people would not want to put down. People could relate to the experience of the main character, Benjamin Privet, because he's not so far in the future from where we are today, and people can relate to his experiences and how he lives his life and the challenges that he faces. And as you've probably seen, if you looked at the cover of the book, there's a lot of lottery balls on the front. And he has a strange experience. He wins the lottery, but he doesn't win the big one. He is one number short, actually. And this is because it happened to me. This is a bit of personal experience. And it makes a big difference whether if you're one number short or whether you get all the numbers right. And in his case, he wins a very small prize, and and also he worries because he has to end up having to pay tax on it, so half of that is gone as well. So it's not really that exciting. Lots of excitement, and then a depression immediately afterwards. But the fact that he got so close puts him into a special group of people who also got that close. But it's at the international lottery in 2061 when this takes place. And so there's a couple of hundred people let's say, around the world who also got that close. So they all end up in this special selection group. And that is what ends up taking him on this epic adventure that I mentioned.
Now, let's talk about the research. Now, again, I know we spent a lot of time discussing Silicon Valley, and again, in your background. So that inspired a lot of the creative ideas and that approach. Now, specifically with the book Future Perfect, articulate to our listening audience, what type of research did you do in preparation for the book?
I've done quite a lot of reading over the years of science fiction, A.G. Riddle and H.G. Wells, one of the favorites. Robert Heinlein, probably one of the very best. Douglas Adams, another one. And a lot of these, especially Robert Heinlein, he was one of the science fiction writers who believed in what they call hard science fiction, which is an odd term, but what it means is that he wanted to have science to be real and realistic. And I completely agree with that. I've been very disappointed, I will say, with a lot of the movies we see on TV and in the theatres, well, not so much in the theatres right now, but on TV. And because they're very heavily into the graphics and the special effects, and the plots are very thin. And usually there's some sort of imaginary, almost magical technology that somebody comes up with to solve some critical plot point. And I didn't want to have anything to do with that. So like Robert Heinlein, I believe in getting the science right. So for the various things that happen in this book, it did require me to read white papers and do a lot of research on some of the more, how can I put this without giving things away? Was some of the more problematic sides of the world that he lived in. I really can't say more than that without giving away one of the main thrusts of the book.
Absolutely.
But reading, I had to read a lot about it. So a lot of white papers, which are theoretical today, I have to say. Nobody really knows how things will work, and so there's some leap of faith to these books and white papers that I've read. And also, as you may have noted, I worked for the European Space Agency for a dozen years or so in Germany and the Netherlands and in France. And so I became fairly familiar with the way that spacecraft, for example, actually work, at least from our perspective. That doesn't mean to say that other worlds would work in a different way, but I sort of understand how ours would work. So yes, that is really what the research that I did, obviously based on my own experience and also doing a lot of reading in the background.
Being an artist myself, I love having this platform to be able to pay it forward to other artists out there that are listening in. Now, you are someone that has published 2 books now, and as you've stated before, Future Perfect is going to be developed into a series of books, so there's more on the horizon to come. Simon, I'd love to have an opportunity to pick your brain for any new writers that are out there listening in. What words of wisdom would you be able to relay to them?
Well, first of all, I would be, and I am, extremely flattered that anybody would ask for my words of wisdom on this, because I consider myself to be somebody who's just starting. I'm obviously going through a learning curve. I had my normal working career, and then I decided to start writing. But the most important thing is people need, in my opinion, need to understand what they are wanting to say. There are many ways of saying it, but if you don't have a central message that you want to convey, then you're going to be going all over the place. You need that central anchor. And as long as you're true to yourself and you're writing what you want to write about, and you feel in your heart that you've done a good job, then I would say that is sufficient success. I don't have any pretenses to becoming, a sort of a world-renowned author. It would be great, and I will, sort of market my books as best I can. But the greatest pleasure that I have derived from writing is the world that I disappear into when I'm writing these books, and the opportunity that it affords for me to really to explore my own imagination and to try to get it right, so that if anybody does read it, they sit back in their chair and they think, yes, that is quite possibly what's going to happen. And if it has an effect on anybody, on how they view the world, then I have been successful.
Guys, such great words of wisdom there. And, you know, the big thing for me that stood out was right off the bat, right from the very beginning. Having that central anchor, I think, is so important. I think a lot of times, you know, with a lot of writers that I've spoken to, not necessarily through this network, but just friends of mine that I know, a big thing is, you know, just to get the process started, people will just start to write. And that is there's nothing wrong with that. Just get the ball rolling, get it moving. But as Simon articulated, what will tend to happen if you don't have a central anchor is now you're just writing all over the place. You're just putting words out on the page because they're coming up. I think that that's a fine starting point. But as he said, having that central anchor, setting up that roadmap so you can have a direction in which you're going is going to make all the difference. And it will really hone in your skills and your narrative. Great words of wisdom there. Guys, listen, what more can be said? You know what you have to do. I know the majority of you are listening in right now, and you've already gone to his Amazon page. You're in the process right now, and you're going to his personal website. For everyone else, I'm going to re-impress it for you one last time. Here on the line with Simon Rowell. We just finished discussing his fantastic book, Future Perfect, available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or directly through his personal site, simonrowell.com. And make sure that when you're there, you also look into picking up his other book, Silicon Valley Job Hunting. This way, you get the two books that are available right now, but make sure you're checking into his website frequently to get the other books that he has on the horizon that'll be coming out very shortly. Simon, once again, thank you so much for being a guest with us today on People of Distinction. It was absolutely our pleasure.
Thank you so much, Benji. I appreciate your time.